Welcome everybody to News Dose. Today we've got a lot to go through. If you haven't heard, Insomniac was hacked by a hacker group. They demanded $2 million from Sony. Sony refused to pay, and now here we are going through the news. We've got a lot to go through. For example, Insomniac's roadmap, what they have in the pipeline, as well as Insomniac's agreement with Marvel for the licensing of a certain new project. As I've said, we've got a lot to go through, but let's get started. First up, we've got Insomniac's roadmap. So from the leaks, it seems there's two different images that have come about. I'm not sure which one's correct, but I will have both of them up. I will have the original one first, the extended roadmap, which goes all the way to 2035. As you can see on the screen, you have Spider-Man, Ratchet & Clank, Spider-Man 2, but from 2024 onwards, we get to see the new projects that they're working on, and Wolverine is slated for 2025. It's still 2 years out. I believe it will be a holiday release, but other than that, we also have Spider-Man 3 2 years after in 2027, and X-Men. Yes, Insomniac have secured the rights for a Marvel X-Men game. But what's peculiar about this image is that X-Men 2 is nowhere to be found. It'd be interesting if another Sony studio was handling the development of X-Men 2. However, the other screen I'm about to show you does say that everything's been pushed back a year, so over into 2026. This, I believe, is a better roadmap, considering if Wolverine needs more time, then Venom can take its place for a 2025 release, since it uses the same models and same resources from the Spider-Man game. And just like Miles Morales being a stepping stone from Spider-Man to 2, this will be a stepping stone from Spider-Man 2 to 3. Speaking of Spider-Man, we've got some Spider-Man 3 news to cover. Insomniac is experimenting or toying around with the idea of breaking it into multiple parts. So, the idea is Spider-Man 3 Part 1 will release in 2027 at a price of around $50, and they're expecting 12 million sales. They will then release Part 2 in 2028, again with 12 million projected sales, and at $50 again. Now this is where it gets a bit confusing, because they are thinking of charging multiplayer component of Spider-Man 3 another $50, but it says that it's day and date with Part 1. I'm not sure if this means it's a separate standalone game where they've stripped the multiplayer and sold it to you, but the fact that they're in two different rows implies that they're probably going to strip the multiplayer and sell it to you separately. They're also thinking about doing a collection or Ultimate Edition combo with Part 1 and Part 2 bundled together. This will cost $60, which is up $10 from the $50 of the other two parts, and they're projected to sell an extra 2 million units. Now, the idea here is if you play Part 1, you're more likely to play Part 2 and see the story through. So rather than selling 15 million units as a single game, they're going to sell 12 million each, or 24 million units for Part 1 and Part 2 combined. Personally, I believe this isn't consumer friendly at all, because they've artificially created a product where they've split it into two and sold you both parts. But on top of it, they are sneaky enough to sell you an up-to-date version later on and possibly strip the multiplayer and then sell that to you as well. Speaking of Insomniac, next up we have their license agreement between themselves and Marvel. It says here that it's going to be released on PC. I believe it's going to be a year later, because according to the termination agreement, that if they do not sell 6 million units combined of its first year after its PlayStation console release, that Marvel can terminate the agreement. It's interesting they say first year of its PlayStation release. If it was released simultaneously, they wouldn't have to say PlayStation or PlayStation specifically. It'd just say within its first year of release. So I think this does allude to the fact that it's going to be 1 year timed exclusive on PlayStation and then released on PC later. The concerning part here is the bundle royalty fee. So for example, if PlayStation was to sell a Spider-Man 2 bundled with a PS5, the fee would be anywhere between 35 to 50%, which is a huge chunk considering Sony makes no money on consoles. Moving on, I believe the important piece of information here, for me at least, coming from an Xbox background, is the exclusivity clause. It says that Marvel cannot, between now until 2035, release or announce any X-Men games on console, PC, or streaming, but the important part here is that they cannot also use any X-Men character as a competitive advantage. To me, that means have Wolverine be, or any X-Men character, be exclusive to a certain platform that isn't PlayStation. It's interesting they use Ultimate Alliance as a example, because we know that was created by Activision. We know that was multi-platform. So I think for Microsoft to be able to bring that to Game Pass, they would also have to be willing to bring it to PlayStation's service as well, to circumvent this issue. Last but not least, we've got the PlayStation's fears and concerns over what the acquisition of Activision by Microsoft means for them in the future, and more importantly, the future industry trends and shifts. Ever since Last of Us came out, they've realized that there's a formula that works for them, and this formula is a third-person, over-the-shoulder, action, cinematic, Game of the Year contenders. And since then, every single game has been very similar to this formula. And because of this, they haven't diversified their portfolio. They haven't created a variety of genres. They have no creativity. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people think Sony and PlayStation is creatively bankrupt. They have no shooters. They have no FPS or third-person shooters. They have a lot of IPs in that genre, SOCOM, Resistance, Killzone, but they've done nothing with it. They've solely relied on the Call of Duty games to give them revenue, and because of this, they've become complacent. They then use that money to fund in-house games, but also get third-party exclusives. For example, a lot of things that used to be multi-platform are only on PlayStation now. And because of this complacency, we are where we are. But anyway, I'll put up the slide from the presentation on the screen. And there's 3 reasons why they think the acquisition of Activision could disrupt and threaten the console gaming and subscription service markets. The first reasoning is that people will shift from PlayStation to Xbox because of timing and in-game differences. I don't think this is true. I think it's a bit disingenuous to argue this. I'm not sure when this presentation was made, but Microsoft promised parity for Call of Duty. They said across the board it will be the same performance, content, as well as pricing. And that means no skins exclusive to Xbox. That means no time frame where it comes early to Xbox either. It's disingenuous because they say it, but they also do it themselves. For example, they were arguing this to the FTC, and the FTC used it as an argument in the court case. But whilst this was happening, PlayStation went ahead and announced exclusive skins in Destiny that's only available if you're a PlayStation owner, because the skins themselves are from PlayStation IPs. So it's one thing saying it, but it's another thing doing it whilst saying it. Very disingenuous. I don't think this point is true. But the other 2 points will change the industry. And the point they're arguing is that Microsoft has a comprehensive ecosystem coupled with their own exclusives, and that creates greater dominance for them. It's not Microsoft's fault that they had to open up their ecosystem to better compete. Sony just got complacent. They stuck to a traditional formula that works, but because of it, they weren't willing to do anything else. They weren't thinking creatively because they got lazy. They're thinking about making games as a service, for example, and live service games. They say they want to go into this formula to diversify their portfolio, to have a constant revenue stream, but there's a lot of issues they have to tackle. First one being PC releases. It has to be simultaneous PC release for their live service games. And on top of it, it has to be purchased once and downloaded anywhere. Do not force your users to buy the same game twice. And on top of it, none of your studios are built for live service. You forced most of your studios that have worked on single player games for 10, 15 years to make live service games. They don't have the experience. To be able to create a live service game, you need to be committed. 95% of these games fail. It's one of the reasons why Naughty Dog cancelled the production of Factions. Their other point is that they face upwards of $1.5 billion of annual revenue threat. Most of this comes from Call of Duty because using that formula of 45 million subs at 12 months, at $12 each month, at 20% charge, I believe that 20% charge was for the new marketing deal they had with Activision. They would take a lesser cut in order to secure the deal. But because Call of Duty brings them so much revenue, they rely on that revenue. They have no shooters, so to fill that void, they made that marketing deal with Call of Duty. At least PlayStation knows. They're not stupid enough to think that people won't swap. The average consumer goes for A, where their friends are, or B, where it's cheapest to play. And if it's any indication of what PlayStation is thinking in the future, especially with Spider-Man 3, games could cost $100 on the PlayStation platform. Why would people stay there when they can get their Call of Duty on GamePass and you only pay a monthly fee? If I was to spend $70 to $100 on one game, I could spend that amount on GamePass and get hundreds of games, including Call of Duty. And because of this, they believe that it will propel Xbox forward and it will allow them to leapfrog past Sony. Because Microsoft does have a huge ecosystem that incorporates PC, incorporates streaming. In the future, it's going to incorporate mobile, and Sony's central pillars, Sony's models, do not allow them at the moment to be able to compete. And because of this, they detail that they need to expand. Like I said, the only way to do this is to change how you deliver your games. Put them day and date on your service. They won't be making a profit that way because the monthly revenue from their subscription service won't cover the investment that they put into the game. If that's the case, again, this is probably one of the reasons why they're thinking about making Spider-Man into 3 parts. That's the case, then think of other ways to do it. Again, they're thinking of live service, got moving forward. But this is what competition breeds. This is what people wanted. Microsoft buys Activision and it will push Sony to compete. I don't want Sony going out of business. Sony needs Microsoft, and Microsoft needs Sony in the console space to compete with each other.